Guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Wednesday, September 18th, 2024, and today we are going to be taking a look at the 538 national forecast, reaching a new high in Kamala Harris's odds at winning the presidency in the 2024 presidential election. Now, I made a video earlier today talking about the Rust Belt region of the United States surging in favor of Kamala Harris as the Democratic nominee. We saw a new poll from Suffolk University just a few days ago showing her up 3 points in the Keystone State in the state of Pennsylvania, doing really well against Donald Trump, but it was reaffirmed today by a Quinnipiac University poll, again, one of the more respected pollsters in the Rust Belt region, showing Kamala Harris with a 1-point lead in Wisconsin, a 5-point lead in Michigan, and a 6-point lead in Pennsylvania. Now, this 538 forecast actually has not been updated to reflect those brand new polls. They were released just around an hour ago, if that. And so I'm recording this video. It's probably coming out sometime around 7, 8, 9 p.m. So if you have time, you can head over to the 538 website and see if these odds have gone up or down. Given the new polls, chances are they're probably going up. But this forecast today, even without the set of new polls that are strong for Vice President Harris, she's at a 61% chance of winning. Now, if you don't know the significance of that 61% number, they have not had a candidate, left or right, in the Kamala Harris-Donald Trump matchup reach any point past 60%. The most we've seen for Donald Trump is roughly around 55, 53%. The most we've seen for Kamala Harris was 60% a few weeks ago. Today, she saw a surge, boosting her up to 61% since the debate. In fact, just around 8 days ago on the day of the debate, Kamala Harris's odds were 55 to 45. Today, they're a differential of about 23 points across the country. So what was 10 is now 23, with a lot of room to expand for Kamala Harris. And so a big question here, I referenced this point a lot about 538's forecast, but I want us to actually unpack what is driving the forecast in this direction, right? They're taking a look at a lot of the new national polls showing Kamala Harris really in the advantage. Almost every single poll they've seen on the net average nationwide, for adjusted results at least, is that Kamala Harris really does take the lead. And so when we're looking at the forecast changing over time, again, the popular vote numbers have changed since the debate, expanded to roughly 5 points nationwide, 4 or 5 points. The win probability has changed over time. It was reaching, nearing getting back to where it was prior to the convention, prior to the VP announcement. Kamala Harris was reaching 54%. All of a sudden, it's at 61. But it is really this electoral college forecast that I want us to unpack. We'll spend some time taking a look at the path to 270, taking a look at some other possible scenarios, the electoral college versus the popular vote, and of course, our closest races to take a look at. But this national forecast here is what really drives the odds and chances for both of the candidates. And so what they focus on are really all of these battleground states. They have odds and forecasts for every single state you can think of, right? They're not just shoving down New York and West Virginia just because of how partisan they are. In fact, in that point too, Kamala Harris wins New York in 99% of instances, whereas Donald Trump's winning West Virginia in greater than 99% chance of in instances too. And what I also find to be, a little bit more interesting is that because this swing state map, or I guess this national map, does in fact include states that aren't traditionally swing states, you start to see where some of the bleeding is happening on both sides of the aisle, right? States like Alaska, where Donald Trump has an 88% chance of winning, Kamala Harris roughly around 12, 13%. That matters in an election because Kamala Harris really should be at a less than 1% chance of winning in Alaska. But it shows some level of bleeding, especially in the context of recent data we've seen out of the state, recent enthusiasm numbers, all of these different metrics. Alaska seems to be a little bit more competitive than we otherwise think. It also tells us a bit about the narrowing of some of these safer Republican states, right? Montana not being at 99% probably means it's going to be by margin a little bit closer, and also that could be a benefit for Kamala Harris. They do allow us to go a bit in depth in these battleground states, so I want to spend some time really rotating through the battlegrounds, and we'll start off with the state of North Carolina, where Kamala Harris now has the upper hand for the first time in a while, really doing well across the state. Donald Trump had maintained that advantage for quite some time. Now Kamala Harris has the advantage in the state of North Carolina. So they take a lot of things into account, polling averages with the adjusted polling average, the forecast of the polling average on election day, the fundamentals only forecast, and their final forecast here, which ultimately ends up with Kamala Harris in the narrow advantage in the state of North Carolina. And so I think that's a big reason too, with its 15 electoral votes, 16 electoral votes, why that matters, right, in this election process, why that matters in 2024 with Kamala Harris. If she wins North Carolina, she more than likely is winning the election too. And so it's not just North Carolina, right? That 52 to 48 forecast is pretty close, but it also shows there has been major improvements for Kamala Harris. But it doesn't just end there. Right, that southern region of the United States, states like Georgia too that can be grouped in there, you see that Kamala Harris has a 53% chance of winning here. But the fact remains, Georgia and North Carolina remain roughly even in terms of their odds of going for Kamala Harris, which is why in my recent forecast, North Carolina and Georgia are roughly on par with one another. And that really makes a difference. Georgia also has been a little bit more difficult for Democrats to win in the past 3 years. Ever since the 2021 midterms, 2021 runoff elections rather, the Republican Party has passed a number of laws surrounding voter engagement, and in some ways what we would call voter suppression, right? And these are things such as banning people from passing out water in lines that might be 5-6 hours long to vote in the polls. This might be different ways that they tackle voter ID or absentee ballot mailing. It's not just Georgia too, right? Texas now has a law where you can only have one drop ballot box in the state of Texas per county. Some counties have just thousands of people. Some counties have nearly millions of people, right? So this is something that really does make a difference in the grand scheme of things. And Georgia is one of those states where the Republican legislature locked rank, knew what they had to do to suppress voters. They decided to move early voting away from days like Sunday, decided to move early voting away from souls to the polls, which is when a lot of the black churches get together and get in buses and vote together after church service. I mean, they have made and done intentional efforts to change the way that the elections have gone in Georgia, and you're starting to see the direct impact of that. Now, I'm not trying to say that this means that this election is rigged by any metric. I'm not at all trying to lean into that level of conspiracy. I'm just trying to acknowledge that there are reasons why Georgia may not be as winnable for Democrats as it might be under the laws that were in place in the 2020 election, or the circumstances that were in place in the 2020 election that likely led to Joe Biden's victory. And so Kamala Harris still is in the advantage and probably drives the national forecast, but she also takes the advantage really in a lot of other states too. In Arizona, Kamala Harris has a 53-47 advantage. There's not much else to see here too. Again, same things are including in the fundamentals here, but it sort of explains why the polling averages really don't dictate all. And Nevada too shows Kamala Harris with a 58% chance of winning. This is actually in direct contrast with what a lot of people are saying in this state based on polling data. But again, polling data is not everything. And when it comes down to Nevada, in fact, Kamala Harris does have that narrow upper hand here, and you're seeing the adjusted average has her up by roughly 1.7%. Final margin they're predicting, Kamala Harris wins by roughly 2, which is less than Joe Biden, but still a victory nonetheless. And so already you're seeing in the states of Nevada, in the states of Arizona, in the state of North Carolina, and Georgia, Kamala Harris takes the advantage. But let's look at that Rust Belt region. That's what really is also too giving Kamala Harris that larger lead than expected. In Wisconsin, Kamala Harris has a 66% chance of winning. In the state of Michigan, Kamala Harris has a 62% chance of winning. And in the state of Pennsylvania, Kamala Harris has a 57% chance of winning. What does that mean? On an electoral map like this, it means that this would be the result should all of the elections come to fruition. North Carolina would be tilt, Georgia would be tilt, Arizona would be tilt, the rest of the states would be lean for the Democratic Party. This is good for Kamala Harris, and again explains why this national forecast is in a really strong position. It isn't just that she is winning on the national popular vote polls. It is the fact that she's winning across Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Georgia, Nevada, and Arizona. 538 is unified in that Kamala Harris has the advantage in every single battleground state. And when it comes down to some other states too, that the Democratic Party is not targeting, but again, are indicators of a stronger than normal Democratic performance. Florida is one of those states. Kamala Harris has a 34% chance of winning in Florida, according to 538. That is insane to think about. I don't think Kamala Harris is winning Florida, but I don't think this margin here is going to be nearly as large as it was against Joe Biden. I'm thinking Donald Trump wins Florida by 3, 4, 5 points. Against Joe Biden, I was talking 6, 7, 8, 9 points. That is no longer the circumstance we are in. In Texas, Kamala Harris has a 27% chance of winning this state. Now again, I think the likeliest outcome here, the more than likely outcome here, is the outcome that's going to happen. A 73% chance of victory is something you would bet on, rely on for victory. But it isn't strong, right? Donald Trump should be at a 95% chance in a state that matters so much. This is 40 electoral votes, right? You take away Texas on the electoral map, Republicans are going to have to play catch up across so many other battleground states. All I have to do here is just show you what it looks like when you characterize all the other states that Biden won back in 2020, and you start to see exactly how powerful the impact of Texas is on an electoral college map. It would see a map like this, 359 in the electoral college count. I'm telling you this now, if Democrats win Texas, which they're not going to, but if Democrats win Texas, they also win Florida too. And so it is really a slippery slope here that these states are even this competitive, which is why I find it to be so interesting that, Kamala Harris's campaign obviously shouldn't focus on it, but they don't really invest any resources in the state. I will say, though, what they knew in 2020 was against the direction I'd be advising them now, which was that now that you have a surplus of money, maybe focus it on some other states, which they are doing some national ad buys. They're getting up in Minnesota, Virginia, New Hampshire. But at the end of the day, what they did in 2020, even at this point, when it looked like they were pretty locked down in the Rust Belt, they still did not invest heavily in Texas and Florida, or they did in Florida, but not necessarily Texas. And honestly, that ended up being the correct call. But again, the point here really remains. Kamala Harris's campaign is probably at its best point compared to Joe Biden at any point, compared to Kamala Harris at any point. She's really doing well. We're seeing consistency in terms of numbers out of the states like Pennsylvania and bellwether counties that really are, and have been, strong indicators as to how a presidential election might go, and 538's forecast is showing the exact same thing. And when it comes down to close races, Kamala Harris wins almost all of them. The next closest race that Donald Trump wins is the state of Florida, a state that 2 years ago voted for Ron DeSantis by 20 points and Marco Rubio by 19 points, right? It's a very different circumstance, and yet it's the closest state that Donald Trump is able to win. And in terms of the path to 270, you can see here, Pennsylvania is that tipping point state, where Pennsylvania puts Democrats over the top. Wisconsin votes to the left of Pennsylvania. Michigan votes to the left of Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania, again, votes to the right of Nevada. Now, I don't know how much I actually think this is going to be the case. I could very well imagine that Wisconsin ends up being the narrowest state out of the 3 Rust Belt states, but they all will likely vote together. I do believe that we are on track to see a blue wall form in the 2024 election, the same way we saw it nearly lock rank back in 2022. When it came down to the governorship, though, that absolutely was the case. Josh Shapiro won by 14. Gretchen Whitmer won by 11. Tony Evers won by 4. Those states were not willing to budge, especially when it came down to questions of abortion and reproductive freedom that were almost directly on the ballot in that election season, which is why we're seeing this election from a very different lens as well, which is why I think we're at a point where if this was the 2020 election, based on the forecast numbers we had seen, this would be a panicking mode. Because even with 90% odds at winning, which ended up being correct, obviously, Joe Biden did win the election, the margins there probably should have been higher. This time, I think we're in for a different circumstance. The polls are different. The national environment is different. This is the first presidential election since Roe v. Wade was overturned. Roe v. Wade was the law of the land for 50 years, 49 years. The 50th anniversary would have been in 2023. 49 years. Why does that matter? It matters because we have not remembered or been alive in most cases, for most of you watching this video, including myself, have not been alive for a presidential election since, before Roe v. Wade. And so abortion really hasn't been this major prevalent factor. Hillary Clinton talked a lot about it, but a lot of people on the left and right laughed it off. There's no way the same Supreme Court that just kept now legalized gay marriage across the country in 2015 was a year later going to strike down Roe v. Wade. And she was, they were right to an extent. But what they were wrong about was the stakes of Donald Trump's presidency when it came down to the United States Supreme Court. No president alive has had a direct impact on the court as much as Donald Trump. 3 justices to the court. That is so substantial. That is really, really good if you're looking at it from the lens of legacy and impact for Donald Trump in terms of, how people perceive that from the right wing. But the left wing sees it as horrifying. And, when it comes down to the issue of abortion, there's a reason why voters who are now the most engaged are more likely to vote blue. Because at the end of the day, a lot of those voters that used to be very strong for the GOP, white suburban women in particular, college educated at that historically have voted red, are now voting blue, largely due to the issue of abortion. And so while Kamala Harris will likely have a larger popular vote sample, her electoral college vote will be a lot closer. It will be a lot closer for a variety of different reasons. And whether that means you are, looking at it from some battleground states that might be pulling her way, but the national average isn't shifting as much. There are reasons why she might be losing some support nationally compared to Biden, gaining some support nationally. This national forecast, though, I do not think should be directly related to what we're seeing in terms of the popular vote, but of course does play a role, right? If Kamala Harris wins the national popular vote by 5.5%, 99% chance she's winning the election. 99% chance. She would be in a really strong position. But at the same time, I wouldn't be shocked if we were in a 2022 type of circumstance where maybe we'd see some reduction in states like California and New York, states where Democrats really aren't investing in. The presence there has sort of gone down in terms of favorability. But Democrats expand in the swing states, just as they did in 2022. The state of Pennsylvania, which is a state that is much more competitive than New York. Joe Biden won New York by 25, won Pennsylvania by 1. New York's gubernatorial race was decided by 5 points. Pennsylvania was decided by nearly 15. And so elections like these bring out really weird results, really weird circumstances, and I wouldn't be shocked if that was the case either. But one thing has remained consistent on the 538 forecast through today. Kamala Harris is now at her highest point ever, and Donald Trump is now at his lowest point ever. A 61-38 advantage with a lot of room to grow for the vice president in a way that we will likely see between now and Election Day that ultimately results in Kamala Harris being up by an even larger amount on November 5th, 2024. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the top of the screen, there's also a Discord server if you go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2024 presidential election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.